So, last week we talked about Nebuchadnezzar creating a statue to make himself a god among men. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego said, absolutely not. I am not bowing down. Someone who's willing to conform their beliefs, if the pressure is on, they are going to stop. They're going to stop doing whatever it is they're doing.
Yeah.
If you were in a crowd of 300,000 people, all moving in one direction, what direction would you move? You follow the crowd. Because if you turn around and you try to walk the opposite way, they're going to run you over. You see, 300,000 people were bowing down before this crazy king. But Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, they turned around and they walked against the crowd, knowing that they were going to be pushed over. In today's society, what are you going to be willing to go against the crowd for? At what point in your life are you going to be willing to stand there and say, you know what, I'm tired of walking with everyone else. I'm going to turn around and start walking against the crowd. People are going to get annoyed because you're pushing them out of the way. So they're going to push you back. They're all going to be yelling and screaming at you and shouting at you. Hey, yo, why are you going this way, knucklehead? Everybody's going that way. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego knew they had to stand out. The key factor here is that even though they were willing to do something different and stand out for it, they were also willing to be persecuted for it. How many of us like to be bullied? Not me! Essentially what Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego were going through was they were being singled out for their beliefs. As Christians in today's world, you're going to be singled out for what you believe in. That's why it's important to know who you are as a person, what you were raised in, what you were raised for. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego knew who their God was, and they knew that nothing could take them from it. So they were willing to stand. And not only that, but they knew their killers. They knew their killers. They knew the people that were trying to kill them were the same people they tried to save. They knew that the king was the king that they vowed to be loyal to 20 years ago. And they were still willing to defy him. So many Christians today, man, they're just dropping like flies. They're conforming to the world, and they're not standing like Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. You know, when Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego were standing there, they were probably looking down at friends they were walking with that they just went to church and worshiped God with, dropping down in an instant to worship an idol. 300,000 people, you can't tell me some of them didn't claim to be Christian. 300,000 people, you can't tell me some of them didn't go to church with Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. 300,000 people, you can't tell me that God didn't speak to some of them. But yet only 3 remain standing. In a world that's so corrupt today, though, we notice so many Christians are easily swayed and fall away. Listen, I know organizations and churches that would have never accepted homosexuality years and years and years ago are suddenly allowing homosexual pastors behind their pulpit. It goes back to the days of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. They're just conforming with the rest of the 300,000. That's what this story is about. 3 men who were not afraid to rebel against the kingdom and create a revolution for Christ. What is a revolution? One person does something different from what? From everyone else. When a revolution begins, it begins with a group of people saying, we are not going to conform to what society is doing. Whether it's the government, whether it's people in general, we are not going to conform to that thing that we deem to be immoral or ungodly. We're going to give you a scenario real fast of what would spark a revolution in the Christian faith. So the government comes down and they say, from here on out, if you want to continue to have your church, you have to allow homosexuals to get married in front of your pulpit. Where does revolution begin?
When we don't allow it.
When you don't allow it. When you have a handful of preachers or an army of Christians that say, we will not stand for this, but we will stand for what we believe is right. We talked about last year, the Bible says, to render unto Caesar what is Caesar. It also says to obey the laws of the land. But if the laws of the land and Caesar is in direct conflict with Christ, then you follow Christ every time. I don't care what government official comes to your house and tells you you have to bow down before President Obama. Yeah, I said it. You don't do it because you know the only person you bow your knee to is Christ. Because in the end, Obama's going to bow to the same Jesus we bow to. Whether he believes in Allah or Jesus or whoever he believes in the end, he's only going to end up dropping to one knee and praying that Jesus doesn't send him to the not-so-happy place. Just saying.
Just say it.
Daniel chapter 3, verses 16 through 18.
Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego answered and said to the king, O Nebuchadnezzar, we are not careful to answer thee in this matter.
Stop. Nebuchadnezzar was like, what is your God going to do to stop me? And Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego are like, we don't need to answer your stupid question, you crazy senile old man.
Whoa.
I don't know if they necessarily said that way, but I'm paraphrasing, so you get it. We don't need to answer your question. Do you have enough confidence in the God that you serve to be able to stand in the face of somebody who is questioning your God to say, I don't need to answer to you? That to me is one of the coolest moments in this story. They are facing death. The king says to him, yo, what is your God going to do that's going to save you? And they're like, we don't need to answer to you. You've lost your mind. I don't need to tell you if my God's going to save me or not. Because my God is awesome. Do you have enough faith in the God that you serve to be able to stand in the face of somebody trying to test your God and say, I don't need to answer to you? Because as Christians, people are going to get in your face and they're going to be like, oh yeah, well what's your God going to do now? And I've had it happen. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, when they took a stand for what they believed in, they took that stand with confidence, knowing that no matter what, it didn't matter if there were 300,000 people bowing down, oh, shakalaka-laka-lama, oh, shakalaka. It didn't matter to them. It didn't matter to them that their uncle, their best friend, or their preacher from church was bowing down to that statue. It didn't matter to them because they stood firm and they said, listen, I don't need to tell you why I'm not bowing down. Because my God is greater than some crazy statue and some crazy senile old man. The devil, listen, when the devil comes to you and the devil starts putting stuff in your mind and the devil starts putting stuff at you, you should be able to have the confidence to say, listen, devil, who do you think you are?
Yeah.
Because God is bigger than whatever situation you're putting me in. That's the confidence you need to have. To say, listen, I don't need to answer to you, Satan, because I am my own man. The Bible says that if you remind me of my past, he will remind you of your future. Guess where that's going to be? Darn right. Get it.
Booyah.
If I had a microphone, I would drop it. I've read it several times. Like, yeah.
Woo.
Who are you to tell me?
Wow.
Read slow because I want them to understand.
If it be so, our God, whom we serve, is able to deliver us from the burning fiery furnace, and he will deliver us out of thine hand, O king. But if not, be it known unto thee, O king, that we will not serve thy gods, nor worship the golden image which thou hast set up.
Boom. Drop the hammer. This part of the story is like so gangster. Because of this right here. First of all, the king was like, okay, so what's your God going to do to save you from my hand? And they were like, I don't need to tell you what my God's going to do or not do. But listen, if you throw me in that fiery furnace, and God does decide to save me, so be it. If he doesn't, well, listen, it's only going to hurt for a little bit, and then I'm going to go to heaven. And in the end, you're going to get all And it's going to last forever. The king was like, so I'm going to give you one more chance. We already talked about this last week. He said, I'm going to give you one more chance to bow down before me. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego were like, yeah, we don't think so. You think you're a god because you erected a statue in your image and you expected all of us to worship it, but you're crazy. You lost your mind. You want to know what the Bible says about courage? It's right there. When God says he will give you the courage to stand, it's right there. A literal story that says, okay, I'm going to give you courage, so whenever you stand against 300,000 and they question you, you're going to be able to say, okay, whatever. My God's awesome. Your God, well, is not really a God. What's the story of Baal when they were sitting there cutting themselves? I mean, they were like ridiculous. A Baal is going to, Okay, there's like 50 prophets or whatever many prophets, and they're like, well, we're going to call down Baal, and he's going to light this on fire for I don't know how many days, hours, weeks, whatever. But when it comes to confidence, God is like, okay, so my prophet's going to stand amongst you 50, and he's going to say this. So, your God sucks. My God's going to rock it. So he's like, okay, so I want you to put all this wood around him. God's going to come down and ignite this. He says, not only is he going to ignite this, but I want you to drench everything around it with water. So, you guys want me to bow down to Baal. And I'm telling you I'm not going to do it. So watch this. Yo, Jesus!
Jesus.
Oh, what you gonna do? And then Jesus was like, tell them to check this out. Boom! Fire. Burned it all up. We have the confidence to be able to maybe not act so crazy about it. Jesus gave Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego the courage to stand. Do you have the courage to stand for what you believe in?
Yes.
It's easy to say yes. But the fact is that do you really have the courage? If somebody's going to shoot you, do you have the courage to stand? I go back to that recent shooting, and I think about those who stood up and said, I am a Christian, after the first and second person got killed. You see, the story is relevant today. Because if you think about that story of that shooting where the guy was killing people who called themselves Christians, they were the Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednegos of today. How many Christians on that campus that day denied Christ? Because he didn't kill everybody, did he? There was like between 12 and 14, not sure. How many of those standing there were Christians that said, no, not me?
Probably a lot of them.
How many of them bowed down with the 300 when it came down to their life? You see, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, we look at that story and we think, well, you know what? It didn't come down to their life because they survived, really, essentially. Jesus Christ saved them. But it was a life or death decision that they made. When they chose to take that stand, when everybody else, when 300,000 people were bowing on their face before this God, before this statue, how many of those 300,000 were Christians? How many of those people in that college or at that place were Christians and said, I'm not a Christian, and only took a bullet to the leg? How many of those didn't stand like Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego? Went to church on Sunday, raised their hands in worship, but whenever the time came, they couldn't do it. The ones that got killed after those, that saw, hey, he's killing Christians, and then still stood there and said, I am a Christian, and died. That's Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego of today. Look at all the mass shootings that have happened in the United States. You can't tell me that some of them weren't concentrated on religious beliefs. If it comes to our area, if it comes to your school, if it comes to where you're at, will you be Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego of today? Will you stand in the face of death and say, I don't need to answer to you because I believe in God and my God will save me. Whether he saves my life today or he saves my soul in heaven, I don't need to answer to you. I will not bow before you and your immoral compass. I will not kneel down before your God. I will not kneel down in fear of my life. I will stand as Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego stood against the crowd of 300,000 people and against the face of a tyrannous king that had a murderous appetite. They did not kneel. That's the importance of this story. It's the situation that was happening around them is exactly like the situations that are happening in today's world. Maybe not 300,000 people right now dropping to worship the Antichrist, but 20 people, 30 people, a high school that says, okay, I'm going to allow boys to go into a girl's bathroom because the boy believes that he identifies with the girl, or I'm going to allow girls to go into a boy's bathroom because they identify as a boy. Are you willing to take a stand and say that's not right in your school? That's being the Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego of today.
Yeah.
Okay, so we need to read Daniel chapter 3, verse 19 through 28.
Then was Nebuchadnezzar full of fury, and the form of his visage was changed against Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. Therefore he spake, and commanded that they should heat the furnace 7 times more than it won't be heated.
Okay, stop right there.
Than it was wont to be heated.
That was verse 19, right?
Yeah.
So, the king was giving them a second chance, and then Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego were like, yeah, no. No, we don't think so. So the king got so angry and so infuriated that he no longer looked at them as, oh, you know what, they were Daniel's friends, they helped me out, blah, 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 blah. It was like seeing red. He was like, you know what? Not only am I going to fry you, I'm going to make the fire so hot that's going to fry you twice. The fiery furnace, it was this round, like pit. Usually the way it was is you could kind of look down in it. All right, finish reading.
And he commanded the most mighty men that were in his army to bind Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, and to cast them into the burning fiery furnace. Then these men were bound in their coats, their hosen, and their hats, and their other garments, and were cast into the midst of the burning fiery furnace. Therefore, because the king's commandment was urgent, and the furnace exceeding hot, the flame of the fire slew this man and took up Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. And then these three men, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, fell down, bound in the midst of the burning fiery furnace. Then Nebuchadnezzar, the king, was astonished, and rose up in haste, and spake, and said unto his counselors, Did we not cast 3 men bound into the midst of the fire? They answered and said to the king, True, O king. He answered and said, Lo, I see 4 men loose, walking in the midst of the fire, and they have no hurt, and the form of the 4th is like the Son of God. Then Nebuchadnezzar came near to the mouth of the burning fiery furnace, and spake, and said, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, ye servants of the Most High God, come forth, and come hither. Then Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego came forth of the midst of the fire. And the princes, governors, and captains, and the king's counselors, being gathered together, saw these men, upon whose bodies the fire had no power, nor was a hair of their head singed, neither were their coats changed, or the smell of fire had passed on them. Then Nebuchadnezzar spake and said, Blessed be the God, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, who hath sent his angel and delivered his servants that trusted in him, and have changed the king's word and yielded their bodies, and they might not serve nor worship any god except their own God. Therefore I make a decree that every people, nation, and language which speak anything amiss against the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego shall be cut in pieces, and their houses shall be made dunghill, because there is no other God that can deliver after this sort.
Okay. So, here's what happened. So Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego were taken by the strongest men that he had. They were like the Rock of the day. You know who the Rock is, right?
Yes.
Dwayne Johnson. So it was like his biggest, strongest, most courageous men that he had in his army. So they get ready, they throw him into the fiery furnace, right? The furnace is so hot that it instantly, there's no There's no screaming, shouting, there's no, oh! It instantly kills the strongest men that Nebuchadnezzar has. Instantly. They're dead. It shows no form of bondage can contain your faith. Nothing can keep you down as long as you stand for Christ.
Fire.